60% mental and 40% physical.
Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Hey, welcome to the BIA podcast. That's Buckeye Grove Instant Access Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon. I will be joined here shortly by Joseph Hastings, our fantastic recruiting analyst. It is Tuesday, May 18th, and we are about 2 weeks away from opening the floodgates in terms of recruiting news. And now that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody needs to be ready on June 1st and expect a bunch of booms at that point, but we are open at that point. We are open for visits. We are open for camps, all of that stuff coming up. Class of 22, class of 23, all of that. And we're going to bring Joseph in right now to start talking about that because I know that's what I get asked about more than anything else. I mean, even with Ohio State looking to replace its back end on the defensive side in 21 and everything else, it's recruiting this and recruiting that. And I couldn't think of a better guest to join us today on the BIA podcast than Joseph Hastings. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Kevin, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. I love talking recruiting. I love talking recruiting with you. For those of you who don't spend a lot of time on Buckeye Grove, Joseph and I spent a good part of 2 weeks on the road with our Southern Swing. First week we were in Texas, then we were in Georgia and Florida. Joseph is now thoroughly bored of all of my stories that I have to tell because we logged a lot of miles on the road, but we also had the opportunity to see a lot of great kids, and while we didn't get to see the entirety of the Ohio State commitment class or anything like that, we certainly have a better grasp on everything just based on putting the miles in.
Absolutely. I mean, that was a trip that spent hundreds and hundreds of miles. You know, we went to Texas. We had the opportunity to go to Atlanta, Georgia, drive all the way down to South Florida, and then make our way back up and catch some kids along the way. Being able to interact with the coaches and the players too, and just see them in person. You know, this is the first time we've had an opportunity to do this, you know, with a trip like this since November, when we went all the way to Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina. So it was great being able to get out there with you, Kevin. We got a little bit of a surprise on our last day with Kai Stokes, you know, Ohio State's second most recent commitment behind Ryan Turner, telling us right there and then that he was going to be committing to the Buckeyes. So just an overall great trip.
Absolutely. I mean, that was one that we didn't necessarily see coming, but, you know, sometimes, you know, as they say, right place, right time, and we were at the right place at the right time. And, you know, that segues perfectly into this first recruiting weekend, June 4th. Kai Stokes will be part of that. A big weekend any way you look at it. A lot of top kids who are uncommitted are going to be in that first weekend. Ohio State, almost their entire recruiting class is going to be in that weekend. You know, it's certainly shaping up to just be a seismic type of weekend over at Ohio State.
Yeah, this weekend is absolutely incredible. The number of big-name targets that are going to be on campus. I mean, you've got five-star offensive tackle Zach Rice. You've got Rivals 100 safeties Xavier Nwangpa and Zion Branch. You have Toriano Pride, which is, you know, it's an interesting addition considering the fact that Ryan Turner recently committed, bringing their cornerbacks total up to 3 in this class. So that's an interesting one to pay attention to. And you also have, you know, in the trenches, 4-star prospects Nick James and George Fitzpatrick. And like you mentioned, Kevin, possibly the biggest aspect of this weekend is that most of Ohio State's 2022 class is going to be getting on campus. We know C.J. Hicks, you know, Bennett Christian. They were talking about a Buckeye Bash 2.0. They were trying to plan that in January and February, and the dead period kept on getting pushed back. But for them to have the opportunity to meet each other, get on campus, you know, see who their future teammates are, it's going to give these, you know, these recruits an opportunity to be sold. You know, if they already haven't been, which we know they are. You know, the class is locked in. They have the group chats. They're recruiting the players, but it gives them just even more incentive to stick with this thing. And be sold even more on the Buckeyes, knowing that you get to know your future teammates. You get to, spend roughly 48 hours or so with each of them. That's huge. And a lot of people don't understand how important that's going to be for them to be on campus and to interact with those targets as well. Because, CJ Hicks and Bennett Christian and Keon Graves, those are the leaders of this 2022 class. Quinn Ewers as well. They're going to be in the ears of the targets that I mentioned before. So that's huge for them to be able to bond together, recruit other players on campus, and then also just meet the coaching staff in person. It's one thing to have these Zoom calls and these phone conversations and text messages and all of that, but it's another thing to meet a person in person, face to face. Ryan Day and his staff are going to be having a loaded weekend and a loaded month ahead of them, because we'll get to it later, but 2023 prospects are going to be arriving as early as June 1st. So it's going to be a long grind. It's going to be kind of like a 30-day marathon in June for them, but it all kicks off with that first weekend. Even though there's going to be a few visitors beforehand, that's going to be the big weekend of the month. Some other notable prospects will be on campus as we progress through June, but they really need to get off to a strong start from June 4th to the 6th. Excuse me.
Exactly. And let's start with talking about the committed prospects, and then we'll kind of rapid fire through some of the uncommitted guys. But you really nailed it there by saying it's, in a lot of ways, it's going to be a first opportunity for many of these guys to meet face to face. It's not the case of where Gabe Powers and CJ Hicks went to the recent rivals camp and, know each other well. You throw Jair Brown in there, you throw Tegrit Shabola, guys that are here within the state and who are able to get to campus relatively easy, or not even necessarily having to meet on campus. I mean, there's nothing that says that they can't just hang out somewhere else. But when you bring in guys like Keon Graves, when you bring in guys like QB1 Quinn Ewers, when you get guys from one coast to the other coast, I mean, this is really going to be that first chance to where people are going to be able to meet in person for the first time, and more so, as you'd said, interact with the coaching staff in person, because, I mean, we've been shut down 16, 17 months, whatever it is, in terms of recruiting. It's all well and good to go through a film session on Zoom or some other form of broadcast media, but it's very different to be able to actually spend time not on camera, things along those lines. I mean, it's going to be so important.
It really is, Kevin. And also being able to interact not only with those future teammates in terms of the 2022 class, but also the players that are already there, get to get hosted by some of these guys, get to kind of know them a little bit more than, those phone calls and text messages, as we had mentioned before. Some people kind of thought, you have these 2022 commits, they're all locked in, we know this, what would the official visit weekend do? It just means a lot to these players. I spoke with Evan Pryor back in October after the Buckeye Bash, the first one, and he said that even though he was locked in since he committed in March of 2020, it was that visit that kind of sold him even more on becoming a Buckeye at the next level, reaffirming that decision he had made. And I think that's just going to do it for all of these 2022 commits. And once again, just them being on campus, having, you would have thought that probably may have been preferable if they were spaced out throughout the month of June, so they can have commits at each of the weekends to talk to these top targets. We'll get into the following weekends, but I initially thought that was the game plan. But I actually like what they're doing here. They're making it a Buckeye Bash 2.0. It really kicks off the first weekend of June. It's going to probably be the biggest one in terms of all the college football programs out there. I haven't seen an official visit list as big as this one here, the Buckeye Bash 2.0. So, Ohio State fans have a lot of reasons to be excited for this weekend here. It truly is going to be the highlight of the month of June, in my opinion. Although the last weekend of June will kind of rival it in terms of the prospects they'll have on campus as well.
You're listening to the BIA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, joined by Joseph Hastings. We were talking Ohio State June recruiting. And yes, and you do have the vast majority of these guys on campus for that first week. I have a feeling that CJ Hicks may as well get an apartment here, because I think he'll probably be here about every weekend. And lo and behold, we love talking about the importance that recruits have in landing other recruits, but there's an entire coaching staff and university structure that will also be very pivotal in it. So while we all love talking about CJ Hicks being Captain Buckeye or whatnot, that Ryan Day guy's pretty good at recruiting. That Brian Hartline guy's pretty good at recruiting. That Kerry Combs guy's pretty good at recruiting. So, it's not like it's going to be a rudderless ship just if these, a dozen recruits are not on campus to be able to be there. But, I'm kind of going to pick and choose some guys in terms of this first visit weekend, and I'll certainly give you the opportunity to anybody I don't touch upon. But the first name that really jumps off the list to me is in-state offensive tackle Emil Wagner out of, I believe he's out of, I'm stalling as I'm opening this up. Yeah, Huber Heights, Wayne. I would have been right there. And I think a lot of people have been expecting Ohio State to close the deal on that one. And while he certainly isn't somebody who said, I'm going to decide just immediately, Ohio State has to feel like it's in a pretty good position and should be able to really solidify itself after a strong visit weekend.
Yeah, I absolutely, completely agree with you there, Kevin. Emil Wagner is somebody that we were kind of expecting. We wouldn't have been shocked if he committed shortly after landing that offer in March. Instead, he opted to drop a top schools list and kind of give his recruitment a little bit of time, which is probably preferable if you're Ohio State, if you're Ryan Day's staff, because he's not going to make a rush decision. When he makes that decision, he's going to be locked in, and most people expect when that commitment comes, when that decision time comes, it's going to be Ohio State. It's interesting to note that he does have official visits to Kentucky the following weekend, Notre Dame after that, and then Penn State the final weekend of June. But in my opinion, I think this one is all Buckeye. Notre Dame is obviously a program worth watching out for, as well as Kentucky. They've done a pretty solid job with recruiting offensive linemen over these past couple of cycles. But I see Emil. If Emil Wagner commits to a school not named Ohio State, I would be absolutely shocked. This was the offer that he was waiting on, and even though he did get the offer back in March, this wasn't something where Coach Stud and offensive line assistant coach Kennedy Cook just offered him in March and tried getting into it late in the game. No, they've been in contact with him. Since September 1st arrived, they reached out to him. Multiple coaches did. This relationship has been in the making for months on end, and then it finally culminated with that offer in March. So I truly believe this one he's going to be all Buckeye. The future cast predictions indicate that as well. So whether he commits shortly after that visit or in July after taking his official visits, it remains to be seen. But I truly believe he's going to end up with Ohio State.
You'd mentioned that they're having a couple of safeties on campus this first weekend with Zion Branch and Xavier Nwankpa. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with that name this morning for some reason. I normally can hit it. I've always felt that Xavier, the safety out of Iowa, always seemed to be kind of right on the cusp for the Buckeyes. But you have Zion Branch, who will be there as well. I think it's really important, as Ohio State picked up a safety in Kai Stokes, but they're really needing to fill some back end spots. How those will kind of go down.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting because I actually heard recently that Zion may be close to deciding soon. No date or time frame was given to me, and that Xavier may actually be waiting until the Under Armour All-America game in January 2022, which that would be very interesting. And I would like to see how the dominoes would fall there, because would they wait it out for Xavier and Nwankpa, maybe not take a commitment from a guy like, let's say, Jake Pope or Markeith Williams out of Orlando, Florida. It gets really interesting there if Branch decides to commit to USC. Does Ohio State decide to wait it out for Xavier if he decides to commit in January? But that's the part that's interesting to me. But either way, whether he commits next month after his visit or in January, I truly believe Xavier's going to wind up with the Buckeyes. The relationships he's formed with the staff and more specifically with the commits is there. Keon Grace and CJ Hicks being two of the people he's closest with. Deshaun McCullough, who's now at Indiana, who committed to Indiana, was close with Xavier and played a crucial part in his recruitment, but I don't see that swinging the pendulum based off what I've heard recently. So, like I said before, whether it's now, next month, in a few months, closer to signing day, I think Xavier winds up with the Buckeyes. Branch is an interesting one. I see the Buckeyes in that top 2 spot with USC, maybe top 3 with Oregon as well. But I'm really interested to see how this one plays out, just because we haven't really heard his name associated with Ohio State at the next level as we have with Xavier and Wongpa. And Wongpa, for the better part of the past 6 months or so, has been seen as a Buckeye lean, and we're just kind of waiting for him to pull the trigger. That's not the case with Branch, but Ohio State is definitely one of the top contenders in his recruitment, and maybe with an official visit weekend where he gets to spend some time with the coaching staff and gets to spend a lot of time with the players, the commits as well, that can kind of, change the momentum. And one thing I forgot to mention, in my previous response, was that getting these guys first, on campus first, is huge. Think about it, Kevin. These guys haven't been on campus with coaches and fellow, peers in the 2022 class, the 2021 class since March, 2020 at the very least. So it's been well over a year, and Ohio State gets the first opportunity to get that first impression to set the tone for the rest of the month, because they blow these kids out the water with their presentation in early June, and then they take the rest of these visits and it doesn't live up to the standard Ohio State set. That could really prove to be vital for the Buckeyes. So going back over to Branch, I think that he could be kind of one more paying attention to in June if that commitment date is closer than it is with Nwangpa. So we'll be keeping our eyes out on them.
We're about 17 minutes in, so I'm going to move us off that first weekend. We could probably do a whole show talking about that first weekend, and keep it locked in at Buckeye Grove. I have a feeling next week you might see us doubling back and doing some more recruiting coverage in terms of a podcast. But, to keep this moving, we go to the weekend of the 11th. One commit is supposed to be coming in that week with Ryan Turner. And then, some names that people certainly are aware of, maybe some names that people don't know as much about. I don't hear people talking about as much about offensive tackle Joe Brunner as I do hear them talking about Jalen Early or somebody like that. And a name that really jumps out to me, though, is defensive tackle Curtis Neal. He's like a big one-tech, 6'2", 310. Ohio State, Wisconsin, both schools that seem to be very much in on this North Carolina prospect who comes from Huff High School in Cornelius, the same school that produced Evan Pryor. Just kind of look at that weekend of the 11th and, what is your assessment of, maybe what sticks out to you?
Once again, as I had mentioned with Toriana Pride, Austin Jordan out of Texas is an interesting one. We've heard that it's Oklahoma and Ohio State with him, and Oklahoma has the edge. That's what we were kind of hearing as of a couple of weeks ago. And with Ryan Turner recently joining the class, you just have to wonder if that's going to push Ohio State, not necessarily out of contention for him, but maybe just give Oklahoma even more of an advantage, considering the fact that Ohio State has 3 cornerbacks committed. But you also brought up Curtis Neal. Look, Ohio State needs interior defensive linemen and defensive linemen in general. They've signed 3 defensive tackles over the past 3 cycles. It's definitely a huge need for the program, and getting a guy like Curtis Neal, who's a Rivals 250 prospect, top 15 defensive tackle in the nation, former teammates with now Buckeye Evan Pryor. He definitely seems like someone who could be close to committing to Ohio State. He's someone that I'm paying attention to for that weekend, shortly following that weekend, if Ohio State decides to give him the green light, of course. And then also you mentioned with Jalen Early. Jalen Early is somebody that I see the Buckeyes leading for. Some of the other schools in his recruitment are Texas A&M and Florida State and Penn State, but Ohio State has done an excellent job of recruiting both him and his mother. He has, excellent contact with with Coach Stud, Coach Cook. They're in contact multiple times per week. They've done Zoom calls and film breakdowns with one another, and Early feels like Stud can develop him for the National Football League. So there's a lot of trust and communication in that relationship. I don't know if that necessarily leads to a commitment shortly after or even in July, but I really like where Ohio State stands with him. And then the two players, a couple out-of-state players that I'm not really too sold on in terms of the Buckeyes' chances with them would be Joe Brunner, as you mentioned, out of Wisconsin. I think he's Wisconsin's to lose, in that recruitment. But I guess what's the thing we always say in terms of these visits? If you can get them on campus, anything can happen. So we'll go with that model for now. But I would be shocked if he leaves the Badgers. And then with Gavin Sawchuk, one of the top running backs in the nation out of Colorado, Coach Alvarez has done a good job in terms of building the relationship with him and his father, Kevin. I've spoken with his father multiple times in the past, and they really like that relationship that they built with Coach Alford. Gavin's already been on campus before. He visited as a freshman, so this won't be anything new to him, except for the fact that it'll be a more in-depth, presentation from the Buckeye staff. So even with that being said, I think it's Dallin Hayden in this class in terms of running back. Most people would assume he's going to be one of two running backs at the very least, and then maybe Omari and Hampton out of North Carolina as that second running back. But Ohio State is a top 3 or top 5 school there for Sawchuk. So once again, anything can happen. But that June 11th through 13th weekend, it's probably, it's still a big weekend in terms of the visitors they're going to get on campus, but it's not as big as some of those other weekends, the first weekend, the third weekend, and the last weekend. So there'll be a lot to pay attention to in terms of Curtis Neal. If the Buckeyes would give him the green light to commit, Jalen Early as well. I really like where they stand with him because his mother, as we learned during our trip, she's big on education. She's big on the academic side of things. So Ohio State has a lot to present with that, with their, real life Wednesdays program, the business opportunities, the academics presented at the school. So he's somebody that I would have Ohio State as either one of the top 2 schools in his recruitment. But once again, that June 11th to the 13th weekend isn't as sexy as the other ones, but there are some names to pay attention to there.
And then we move into the third weekend. It's a little bit different because you have some midweek visits or whatnot. So, we go the 4th, we go the 11th, and then we go to the 18th. But before that, on the 14th, you have Addison Nichols, the offensive tackle, coming in. And then on the 18th, Dallin Hayden, wide receiver Kojo Antwi, safety athlete Jake Pope. And then shortly right on the back end of that, on the 22nd, Tyler Booker, offensive tackle. You have a nice little group there, but I also see, trying to sort out a recruiting class is a giant game of dominoes. And, the week after, Ohio State has Caleb Brown coming in. What does that mean maybe for Kojo Antwi? Certainly you'd mentioned your thoughts on Dallin Hayden, and I agree on that at running back. There's certainly some dominoes in play in terms of what the safety board looks like. Jake Pope was somebody we had the opportunity to talk to, tremendous baseball player as well. But, that third weekend may be the lightest in terms of numbers. But, on the flip side, though, there's certainly the chance for maybe a little bit more attention paid on these guys because coaches aren't going to be spread as thin.
That's actually a really good point because while it is great to have, well over a dozen visitors that first weekend of June, you're going to have the coaches spread out, trying to, talk with each of these guys, get as much ample time and show them that they're a priority. Because you also want to show the commits too that, they're prioritizing them. But you're just not going to have a lot of time to dedicate to each of these guys. Whereas with, Kojo Antwi and Dallin Hayden, Jake Pope for that third weekend, the 18th through the 20th, you're gonna be able to spread out the coaching staff, have multiple guys talking to them consistently, and really show each of them that they're a priority for the staff. So with Dallin Hayden, as we had mentioned before, most people see him as a shoe-in for the Buckeyes. Notre Dame is also there, also in the mix, but they have a running back committed in Jadarian Price right now. And then also Tennessee, the school that his father played for, is worth paying attention to. But interestingly enough, we had heard behind the scenes that Hayden actually had a better relationship with Tennessee's old staff, with Jeremy Pruitt, than he does with the new staff there. So I definitely think this one's going in Ohio State's favor. And I could really see him canceling that Notre Dame official that he has the weekend after and just committing to Ohio State. You talked with him after he visited, took a self-guided trip in March. He enjoyed himself, showed up in an Ezekiel Elliott jersey. He sees a fit for himself in that offense, and to be what would now be the only running back in Ohio State's 2022 class is definitely appealing to him. Then we move over to Kojo Antwi. And this is interesting because we'll get into Caleb Brown the weekend after, but most were kind of seeing Kojo as the likeliest third wideout in this class, maybe as far back as a few weeks ago, but now some things are starting to develop. We heard about Caleb Brown's name getting into the mix, Quinn Ewers, wide receiver, who could potentially be camping at one of those 6 camp dates, maybe heading up, could potentially earn an offer. So, and we know they're still talking to Penn State commit and in-state prospect Caden Saunders. So the wide receiver board is very interesting right now. And I didn't even mention C.J. Williams, a top 3 player at the position, who canceled his visit to Ohio State due to track obligations, but is expected to take an official sometime in the fall. So it's a little bit more murky now than it was before. They could be taking up to 4 wideouts. How does that affect, Antwi and, his decision-making process? We'll see. But, Antwi is a big-time guy. We saw him, at the Rivals camp in Atlanta, Kevin. Big, strong dude. And that's the kind of wide receiver that I thought Ohio State was going to try and get for that third wide receiver spot. With Keon Graves and Caleb Burton committed now, I thought that the stronger receiver was going to be what they were going to go for, with Antwi and Williams. But now they're kind of branching out more. And Caleb Brown is kind of not necessarily a gadget guy, but he'll go in the slot. He could go in the backfield as well. And it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. But Antwi has Ohio State in top 5. This is going to be, as of right now, the second to last official visit for him. The last one will be USC at the end of June. We heard that Ohio State could be as high as top 2 in his recruitment, along with Alabama. Texas A&M's also in the mix as well. So, and you can't rule out the in-state Georgia Bulldogs. We'll see what happens with him. I tend to believe he's going to end up in the SEC at the next level. But this visit could prove to be vital for Ohio State in terms of changing the momentum there. And then finally, with Jake Pope, Kai Stokes' recent commitment kind of throws this one into unknown territory. I brought up his name before, with Xavier and Wongpa potentially waiting it out until January. What if a guy like Jake Pope wants in? Do they take him, potentially risk their chances with Nwangpa? So we'll see with him. But, Pope may decide to extend his recruitment out a little bit further. He picked up a couple of big offers in LSU and Florida recently. We know he's considering Alabama, North Carolina, Notre Dame as well. So and the Georgia Bulldogs. That one I think could actually last a little bit longer than some of these other recruitments. But yeah, this weekend it's going to give these coaches a lot of time to spend with these guys, show them that they're a priority for the staff. And I really do believe Hayden could end up being the one who commits shortly after that trip concludes.
And just to jump in there, the South Lake Carroll receiver is Landon Sampson, a 6'1", 180-pounder who currently is ranked as a 3-star, but I have a feeling that they're going to be taking some more looks at him, and certainly with Quinn Ewers being QB1 out there, I mean, there's not going to be any lack of looking at his film week in and week out. But let's rapidly move to the final week as you're listening to BIA podcast, and we're about 29 minutes in already, and that's the weekend of the 25th. And you do have one Ohio State commit with Jaheim Singletary out of Jacksonville, but a lot of big names here too that, there's interesting subplots. Cam Dewberry, the offensive tackle out of Houston, said he grew up as an Ohio State fan, but, will they be able to close that deal? Ohio State's there near that top cut. We've talked about Caleb Brown. You got Kenyatta Jackson, who's a teammate of Ryan Turner, the defensive end out of South Florida. You've got Joshua White, who was a bit of a surprise in terms of we knew that they were going after Kristen Miller, who's traveling that weekend. Joshua White announces to us, I'm taking official that weekend as well. You've got potential second running back in the class, even though they don't have their first running back in the class yet with Omarion Hampton. You've got safety Markeith Williams out of Orlando. I could go on and on. I'm sitting here looking 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. They're going to have more than a dozen officials that we know of at this point. And remember this, folks, if you sit there and you're listening to this show in June and the list of who's coming in is different than the list we're telling you, officials happen, they pop up, they drop off. A lot can happen between now and then, but certainly shaping up to be another big weekend, especially in terms of undecided kids.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with that one there. This one is probably going to be bigger than the first weekend, just in terms of the sheer amount of targets that they have on campus. You talked about Kristen Miller and Joshua White. I'll start off with them. They're big-time defensive linemen out of Cedar Grove High School in Ellenwood, Georgia. And we were surprised when White told us that he was going to be taking the official too. But, this one could actually help out Ohio State. If they start putting on the full court press, if Larry Johnson and company start really aggressively pursuing White and say, hey, you have a spot in this class, maybe that could influence Miller to commit to the program as well if White decides to go on board. They told us both that they want to play together at the next level. The only common school between them right now is Ohio State. And when we spent time with them a few weeks ago, they were laughing and joking with one another. They're really close friends. So maybe Ohio State decides, okay, we don't have any defensive linemen in this class. White probably wasn't, our top target, of course, when it comes to D linemen. But if it helps us to get Miller, we'll go ahead and give both of them the green light, and maybe that could lead to both deciding to wrap their recruitments up and committing shortly after that weekend. But just focusing specifically on Miller, because we know he is a definitive take for Ohio State. He got offered back in February. And one thing that's interesting about his recruitment is he's really focused on brand opportunities, name, image, and likeness. And there's possibly no bigger brand in college football, aside for a couple other schools than Ohio State. So, I expect Buckeyes to really focus on those life after football opportunities that they present. I mentioned the Real Life Wednesdays, and I think that could definitely sell him. And also the fact that they're getting the final official visit for Miller is huge in his recruitment. We talked about Caleb Brown beforehand, but he's somebody that we heard is a take for the Buckeyes. That was a question that we had, but he definitely is going to be a take for the program. I don't know if he would commit before, he takes that visit. A lot of the smoke has been he may decide to wrap up his recruitment after. Either way, I at this time I see him being the next wideout to commit, and I say next wideout because there could potentially be a fourth if they decide to explore that option. We'll see what happens there. A lot have viewed him as kind of a Michigan lean, but it was with the contingency, that he may end up going to Ohio State if Ohio State decides to put the full court press on him, and that seems to have been the case recently. You talked about Cam Dewberry, and he's an interesting one because you see prospects like this, in every single cycle where they say that they have a dream school, that this is the school they grew up watching. They would love to play for them, but it doesn't necessarily end up happening, and that's kind of how I feel with this one here. I really feel like he's an Alabama type kid, or potentially staying in state at the next level, maybe Oklahoma, but I have a hard time seeing the Buckeyes being able to pull this one out. I did mention in my recent June visitor preview, which you can find on BuckeyeGrove.com, that with Ohio State's connection to the state of Texas, he is friends with Donovan Jackson as well, the 5-star offensive lineman. They signed this past December. That could potentially help them, but I once again, I would have a hard time seeing them winning this battle out over the schools that I had mentioned before. You have Kenyatta Jackson, who told us that Ohio State is in his unofficial top 4, along with Oregon, Oklahoma, and Florida. Right now, Ohio State is one of 2 schools guaranteed an official from him, Oklahoma being the other the weekend before he takes that Buckeyes official. I really like where things kind of stand with him as well. I think with Ryan Turner being committed, his teammate, they're at Chaminade Madonna, that in South Florida, that could actually help them. They're friends, and there was even a tweet he had sent out, quote tweeting an edit, and he said future teammates, and put a question mark in the eye emoji and tagged Ryan Turner in it. That's one to pay attention to as well. Now we get to Marion Hampton, and our Carson McRae from Buckeye Grove reported this past Sunday that Hampton may actually be willing to be the second running back in the class. We had that confirmed as well. So that's going to be something to pay attention to. If Hayden decides to commit shortly after he takes that official visit, June 18th to the 20th, how does that impact Hampton, if in any way? Would he be as willing to pull the trigger that early, shortly after Hayden commits? We'll see, and we'll see how the dominoes fall there. And some other players you mentioned, Gabe Dindy, Jaden Bellamy, those are some guys that we don't really know too much about. They don't talk to the media that often. We'll see how things play out with them, but this is a really impressive visit weekend to cap off June, in my opinion, for Ohio State. It's as good as it's going to get. Having Jaheim Singletary there, even though he isn't the recruiter, admittedly, he told us this, he's not a recruiter like C.J. Hicks and Bennett Christian are. Having him be in some of these guys' ears could potentially help as well. He carries a lot of weight, being one of the top cornerbacks in the nation, being a 5-star prospect. So, heck, even if he says just come join Ohio State, that carries some weight to it. So, this is once again, this is a huge weekend for the Buckeyes, and it'll cap off a great month of visits that they have.
And I'm going to finish up on 2022 on the other side of a break. We're 36 minutes in. I'm Kevin. We have Joseph. We're talking about Ohio State's June recruiting movement, but we desperately need to take a quick break so we can finish up strong here in the second segment. We will be right back. Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Welcome back to the BIA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, joined by Joseph Hastings. We were talking Ohio State June recruiting. We were going to do this whole second segment just on 23, but we still got a little 22 to talk about. I'm going to ask a question that we didn't necessarily prep for, and, not going to hold you to this, but what is your over-under on how many commitments you think we could see happening between June 1 and whatever it is, June 30th? Just if you had to guess, this is non-binding. People, please do not go to your local sports book, try and place any wagers on this. This is all for entertainment purposes only, but, give me an over-under.
Reasonably, I would say 2.5, and that may seem kind of like a low number just based on the fact that Ohio State fans want all these booms to happen in June, but at the same time, you don't know if you want these guys to be committing shortly after the visits and not be 100% sold. Cancel some of those other trips that they had, and then maybe later on decide that they want to take some officials. So I think Ohio State's going to get the guys that they really want in this class. I could see Emil Wagner joining. I could see Dallin Hayden joining. And then as for that third one, it's kind of a toss-up in the air as to who it could be. Maybe Caleb Brown decides to join as well. That's why I'm kind of feeling that 2.5 number, because I feel like Hayden and Wagner are somewhat the guarantees, as close to a guarantee in recruiting as you can get, I should say. And then that third spot's kind of up in the air with, like a Curtis Neal, as I mentioned before, Caleb Brown. So I'm going to go with 2.5 as for now, but it could potentially be as high as 4 or 5. I would not be surprised if the Buckeyes are able to land that many commitments, especially some of those top guys want in. But, they're still – we have to remember after June, we're only halfway through the year 2021. And, you don't know if you necessarily want your whole class to be filled up, especially if you take some guys that you probably were going to wait out for in the long run anyway. So I expect – I think if Vegas was to put odds on this here, which we know is not the case, but I think the odds would be, 2.5. That's what the over-under would be placed at. And I would probably take the over just based on the sheer number of prospects who are visiting, the fact that this is, right after the dead period ends, a year-long plus dead period. These kids are anxious to get out. They may just want to pull the trigger immediately, get the recruitments over with after they take some of these visits. So I'm going to set it at 2.5, and I'll take the over on that one. What about you, Kevin? What would you take there?
Yeah, if we're setting it at 2.5, I'm taking the over. If we're setting it at 3.5, I might take the under. I think 3 might be the magic number, but I agree with a couple of names you mentioned. I think somebody like a Curtis Neal could pop as well. Just my feeling there, not based really on any. I've never spoken to the kid. Well, that's not true. We've traded a couple of Twitter DMs. Wasn't a fan of one of his photos and asked me to change those out for him. So I have talked to him, but yeah, I think that's fair. But I could see, I talking to CJ Hicks and Gabe Powers, and off the record, they're like, "Oh, plenty of booms are coming." But then again, I could talk to them in April. Plenty of booms are coming. So you have to kind of put it all in perspective, or whatnot. We're going to really have to talk more about 23 in depth on our show next week. But Ohio State is coming up with opening up camps June 2nd, 8th, 9th, 15th, 16th, 22nd. They're going to have plenty of opportunities for some top guys to come in. Sonny Styles, the talented maybe safety, maybe linebacker. What does he grow into out of Pickerington, is going to be there on the 2nd. A talented in-state tight end in Tanner LeMaster, who doesn't have an offer. He's going to be working for one of those that first weekend. A lot of out-of-state kids are going to be getting set up to come in. Let's just kind of speak at a mile high and kind of try and put a little bit of a bow on 23 with the promise that we absolutely will come back with this tomorrow or next week, as we're north of 40 minutes right now.
Yeah, so it kicks things off, when it comes to 2023 recruiting. June 1st, Luke Montgomery, in-state offensive tackle target, is going to be visiting, followed by, as you mentioned, Alex Sonny Styles the next day. Tanner LeMaster will also be camping on June 2nd. And that first weekend, we're going to be paying attention to the official visitors, of course, but top 50 overall sophomore prospect, Derek LeBlanc, out of Florida, is going to be visiting as well. He's a defensive end, so he's worth paying attention to. And that next week is huge as well, the second week of June, where you have Rivals 100 running backs, Joseph Hastings, Richard Young, and Trayon Webb taking visits to Ohio State. And Richard Young will actually be he's the number 1 running back on Rivals, by the way. He will be in town June 9th to the 11th. So that's going to be a 3-day visit. That same week, you're going to be having IMG Academy wide receiver, top 50 overall prospect, Carnell Tate in town as well for a 2-day visit. And, speaking of players camping, Joshua Padilla, who's also from Wayne High School, just like Emil Wagner is as well, the 2022 offensive lineman target. Padilla is going to be camping on June 8th. While the next day, North Carolina defensive tackle Keith Sampson will be camping the following day. So that first half of the weekend, the first half of June really gets off to a strong start there. And there's going to be some more prospects flowing in, as the days go by as well. And then we also have A.J. Harris, a top 30 overall sophomore. He's going to be beginning a 2-day visit to Ohio State on June 16th. And then the 22nd through the 23rd is the last one I'll mention, because that'll feature Malik Bryant, one of the top linebackers in the 2023 class, and Peyton Kirkland, who we had a chance to speak with. He's a Rivals 100 offensive tackle out of Orlando. And one more paying attention to, Kevin, before I wrap up this little segment on 2023, is Jaden Osbury. He's a top 25 overall sophomore on Rivals. He's going to be camping on June 22nd. He doesn't have an offer from Ohio State just yet, but, that's going to be one we're paying attention to. I spoke with him recently, and he believes that an offer will arrive shortly after that trip. And the last one I'll mention is not 2023. He's a Rivals 100 cornerback out of Texas, and he's a 2022 prospect, is Julian Humphrey. He tweeted a few weeks ago that he's going to be taking a visit to Ohio State in June as well. So, besides the official visitors, they're going to soak up all of the attention, of course. There's going to be some big prospects on campus, and it's going to be something where it's going to be a scenario where Ryan Day and his staff are going to be packed. It's going to be jam-packed throughout the month of June. It's definitely going to be a test of stamina here, because, it's going to be every single day that they're grinding out. But, just based on, what we've been hearing behind the scenes and, what we've kind of seen in these press conferences, they're ready to go. They're ready to get these prospects on campus, meet them face to face. It's been well over a year, so I think they're ready for the task.
And as I said, we will go much more in depth on 23 next week on our show. maybe an audio podcast, maybe a video podcast. Keep it tuned in at Buckeye Grove. We'll let you know all the details there. We may even take a couple of your questions as well, but we are at 45 minutes. That is about as long as we like to go on these. I really want to thank Joseph for coming in, and of the 45 minutes, I think he spoke for about 35 of them, and I'm just fine with that. Just dropping all sorts of knowledge out there. If you wanna stay in the know, be sure to be a part of BuckeyeGrove.com. Be in the Horseshoe Lounge. See all of Joseph's great work. We have a nice supporting role with Carson McRae as well. Joseph, anything else as we wrap this one up?
No, Kevin. I can't wait to get back onto the podcast next week and go just even more in depth. There's some players just based on how big this month of June was that I didn't even get to touch on. Tyler Booker and Addison Nichols and Eli White. There's just some more guys to get to go more in depth on and update on their recruitment. So I'm looking forward to doing that next weekend. Thank you once again for inviting me on this podcast, and I look forward to getting back at it again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Joseph. And I want to thank you all for listening. This is a BIA podcast. We promise we will be back very soon talking 2023 and news as it breaks. Once again, I'm Kevin Noon, BIA podcast. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game. Exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcasts Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to click on that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing, and come visit us over at BuckeyeGrove.com for all the best Ohio State information on the web.